The small barn erupted in gasps as Marine veteran James Mason stumbled backward, his weathered face turning ghostly pale. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, steadying himself against the wooden beam as the local vet, Dr. Sarah Chen, stood frozen, her medical instruments clattering to the ground. What emerged from Shadow's delivery wasn't just unexpected, it defied everything they thought they knew about nature itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thunder rolled in the distance across the Montana sky as James Mason's hands trembled, running them through his graying hair while staring at the medical reports spread across his modest farmhouse table. It had been 3 years since he'd traded his Marine Corps uniform for the quiet life of running Hope's Haven, a therapeutic riding center for fellow veterans struggling with PTSD. The transition hadn't been easy, but the horses, particularly Shadow, his prized black Arabian mare, had become his anchor in the stormy seas of civilian life. "I don't understand," James murmured, his military-trained composure wavering as he studied the ultrasound images for the 10th time that morning. Dr. Chen, who had been working with Hope's Haven since its inception, adjusted her glasses with practiced precision. "The readings are unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of veterinary medicine, James. Shadow's pregnancy. It's not typical." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air, much like the medals that still hung untouched in James's bedroom closet. Shadow had been more than just a therapy horse. She'd been his personal savior during the darkest days after his return from Afghanistan. The thought of anything being wrong with her pregnancy sent a familiar surge of anxiety through his chest, the kind he hadn't felt since his last tour. "What exactly are we looking at, Sarah?" The question came from Maya, James's daughter, who had inherited her father's determination and her late mother's gentle touch with the horses. At 24, she'd become the backbone of Hope's Haven, coordinating the therapy sessions while pursuing her degree in equine-assisted psychotherapy. Dr. Chen's explanation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Johnson, one of the regular veterans who participated in the therapy program. His service dog Rex padded quietly beside him as he entered the farmhouse kitchen. The former Army Ranger had been one of Hope's Haven's first success stories, finding purpose again through working with the horses. "The ultrasound shows something extraordinary," Dr. Chen continued, choosing her words carefully. "The fetal development is unlike anything documented in equine medical literature. The structure, the readings, they suggest something that should be impossible." James felt his military training kick in. Assess, analyze, plan. "Give it to me straight, Doc. What are Shadow's chances?" His voice carried the same authority it had when he'd led his Marine unit, though now it held an undercurrent of concern that he couldn't quite mask. "Statistically speaking, this type of anomalous pregnancy has a survival rate of less than 0.01%. Dr. Chen's words cut through the room like shrapnel. "My professional recommendation would be to terminate before complications arise. Shadow's life could be at risk if we proceed." The kitchen fell silent, save for the gentle whirring of the ceiling fan and Rex's soft panting. Maya's hand found her father's shoulder, squeezing gently, a gesture reminiscent of how her mother used to comfort him after his nightmares. "No." The word escaped James's lips before he could stop it, carrying the weight of every difficult decision he'd made in combat. "We don't leave anyone behind. That was true in the Corps, and it's true here." Marcus stepped forward, his prosthetic leg catching the morning light streaming through the window. "James is right. Shadow helped me find my way back when I thought I was lost for good. We owe her a chance." Dr. Chen's expression softened with understanding. She'd seen firsthand how the bonds between the veterans and the horses had worked. Miracles at Hope's Haven. I respect your decision, but you need to understand the risks. This won't be an easy journey. Maya's voice cut through the tension, steady and clear. When has anything worth fighting for ever been easy, Dad? You taught me that. Her words carried echoes of countless lessons learned during their rebuilding of the farm after her mother's passing. James stood, moving to the window that overlooked the paddock where Shadow grazed peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around her future. The morning sun cast long shadows across the therapeutic riding arena where so many veterans had found healing. In Shadow's gentle eyes, many had seen their first glimmer of hope after returning from war. James remembered the day he'd first brought her to Hope's Haven, a skittish, traumatized mare who'd survived a stable fire. Something in her broken spirit had called to him, recognizing a fellow survivor. We'll need to monitor her constantly, Dr. Chen advised, gathering her papers. Any sign of distress, any complication, and we'll need to act immediately. I'll be on call day and night. She paused, pulling out her tablet to show them more detailed scans. These readings here, they're completely unprecedented. I've already consulted with 3 other specialists, and none of them have seen anything like it. We'll set up a rotation, Marcus offered, his military planning experience evident. The guys from the therapy group, they'd want to help. We take care of our own here. He moved to the large whiteboard where they usually scheduled therapy sessions, already sketching out a watch schedule with military precision. 2-person teams, 4-hour shifts. I'll coordinate with the other vets in the program. Maya watched her father's expression carefully, recognizing the look he got when his mind was made up. It was the same determination she'd seen the day he'd announced they were converting their family farm into a therapeutic riding center, despite the skeptics who said it would never work. Just like then, she knew there would be no changing his mind about Shadow. I'll start gathering supplies, she said, already making mental notes. We'll need to convert the old tack room into a monitoring station. And Dad, she hesitated, touching his arm gently. I'll call Uncle Mike at the construction company. We might need to reinforce the stable, make it more secure for whatever's coming. James nodded, his jaw set with resolution. The same spirit that had carried him through 3 tours of duty now steeled him for the challenge ahead. Shadow wasn't just a horse. She was a symbol of everything Hope's Haven stood for: healing, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the aftermath of trauma. The next few days at Hope's Haven transformed the quiet, therapeutic riding center into something resembling a military operation. James found himself falling back into the familiar rhythms of command, coordinating teams and establishing protocols with the same precision he'd once used in combat situations. The old tack room, now converted into a monitoring station, hummed, with medical equipment borrowed from Dr. Chen's clinic. Everything needs to be logged, James instructed during the first volunteer briefing, addressing the group of veterans who had stepped up to help. The gathering in the barn's main aisle included former Army Rangers, Navy corpsmen, and even a retired Air Force para-rescue specialist. Shadow's vital signs, eating habits, behavior, nothing is too small to note. Tom Sullivan, a former combat medic who'd found solace at Hope's Haven after 3 difficult tours in Iraq, raised his hand. I've been researching equine pregnancy monitoring equipment. My buddy at the VA hospital might be able to get us some additional supplies. His service dog, a German shepherd named Echo, sat alertly at his feet. Good thinking, Tom, Maya replied, updating their resource list on the large whiteboard they'd mounted near Shadow's stall. She'd spent the morning arranging medical supplies with the same methodical care she'd learned from organizing therapy sessions. We'll need all the help we can get. The atmosphere in the barn held an unusual mixture of military discipline and tender concern. Shadow, seemingly aware of the attention, stood quietly in her reinforced stall, her dark eyes watching the proceedings with typical Arabian intelligence. The mare's enlarged belly was now the subject of constant observation and scientific confusion. Dr. Chen arrived for her daily checkup, her usual professional demeanor tinged with barely concealed excitement. "The readings are still unprecedented," she announced after examining Shadow. "I've been in touch with researchers at 3 different veterinary universities. They're all fascinated by the data we're collecting." James noticed Shadow's ears twitch at the declaration, and he moved to stroke her neck soothingly. The mare leaned into his touch, a gesture that brought him back to his first months after returning from Afghanistan. Back then, it had been Shadow who helped ground him when the memories became too intense, her steady presence an anchor in the stormy seas of his PTSD. "She's not just a research subject," he reminded everyone firmly, his voice carrying the weight of command. "She's family, and we protect our family." The assembled veterans nodded in understanding. They'd all experienced Shadow's unique ability to heal during their therapy sessions. Maya approached with Shadow's evening feed, carefully measured according to Dr. Chen's specialized diet plan. "Dad, have you seen the latest ultrasound images?" She pulled out her tablet, displaying the most recent scans. "Look at these readings. They're completely off the charts." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus wheeled himself closer, his prosthetic leg recently adjusted for the long hours of barn duty he'd volunteered for. "I've never seen anything like it," he commented, squinting at the screen. "Almost looks like something out of a sci-fi movie." The unusual readings had become the subject of intense speculation among the Hope's Haven community. Some of the veterans had started a good-natured betting pool about what Shadow might be carrying, though James discouraged wild theories. His focus remained solely on keeping Shadow healthy and comfortable. Later that evening, as the sun set, behind the Montana mountains, James sat in his usual spot outside Shadow's stall, completing the day's observation logs. The mare dozed quietly, her breathing steady and strong. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the arrival of Carol Matthews, one of their regular therapy participants and a former Marine Corps helicopter pilot. "Thought you could use some coffee," Carol said, offering James a steaming mug. "Maya mentioned you've been pulling double shifts." She settled into the other chair, her own service dog, a gentle golden retriever named Whiskey, curling up at her feet. James accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing the familiar gesture of military camaraderie. "Can't help it," he admitted. "Keep thinking about how Shadow was there for all of us when we needed her most." "Remember your first session here?" Carol nodded, her eyes distant with memory. "Couldn't even walk into the barn without having a panic attack. Shadow just stood there, patient as could be, until I was ready. Never pushed, never rushed, just waited." She smiled softly. "That mare's got more therapeutic instinct than half the counselors at the VA." The quiet conversation was interrupted by a soft nickering from Shadow's stall. Both veterans turned to see the mare watching them intently, her intelligent eyes seeming to understand she was the subject of their discussion. James rose to check on her, his movements automatic after weeks of constant vigilance. "Hey, old girl," he murmured, running his hands along her sides with practiced care. "How are you holding up?" Shadow responded by gently butting her head against his chest, a familiar gesture that never failed to center him. The unusual warmth radiating from her body reminded him of the extraordinary situation they were facing. Carol joined him at the stall door, her pilot's trained eye assessing Shadow's condition. "Whatever's coming," she said quietly, "we'll face it together. That's what we do here at Hope's Haven. We stand together." The first real crisis struck during the pre-dawn hours of a crisp Montana morning. James was jolted awake by the urgent ringing of his phone, Maya's voice tight with concern on the other end. Dad, something's wrong with Shadow. Dr. Chen's on her way, but you need to get to the barn now. He was dressed and running across the farmyard before the call ended. Decades of military training kicking in as adrenaline coursed through his system. The sight that greeted him in the barn sent his heart racing. Shadow was lying on her side, her breathing labored, while Maya and Tom Sullivan worked quickly to assess her condition. Her temperature's elevated, Tom reported, his combat medic, experience evident in his calm efficiency. Pulse is rapid, but steady. She started showing signs of distress about 20 minutes ago. Echo, his service dog, maintained a vigilant position near the stall entrance, unusually alert. Marcus wheeled himself into the barn, having received the emergency alert they'd set up for the volunteer team. "I've got the medical kit from the monitoring station," he announced, already pulling out supplies. The former ranger's handling of his wheelchair in the cramped space spoke of countless hours adapting to his new mobility. James knelt beside Shadow, placing a steady hand on her neck. The mare's skin quivered beneath his touch, but her eyes found his with that same trusting gaze that had helped him through countless nights of PTSD-induced insomnia. "We're here, girl," he murmured. "Just hold on." Dr. Chen arrived in record time, her usual professional appearance slightly disheveled from the urgent call. She immediately began examining Shadow, her movements quick but thorough. The assembled group watched in tense silence, the only sounds being the gentle whir of medical equipment and Shadow's labored breathing. "The readings are all over the place," Dr. Chen announced, frowning at her instruments. "Whatever's happening in there is putting enormous strain on her system." She pulled out additional monitoring equipment from her bag, the sophisticated devices casting an almost otherworldly glow in the dim barn. Carol Matthews arrived next, still in her pajamas with whiskey, trotting faithfully beside her. The former pilot's quick assessment of the situation revealed her military training. "What do you need?" she asked simply, already rolling up her sleeves. "We need to stabilize her temperature," Dr. Chen directed, "and try to make her as comfortable as possible. This could be a long night." She paused, studying the latest readings with growing concern. "I've never seen reactions like this in a standard equine pregnancy." The next few hours became an exercise in teamwork and endurance. The veterans fell into an efficient rhythm, their military training transforming into a different kind of life-saving mission. Maya coordinated their efforts, her voice steady as she relayed Dr. Chen's instructions and kept track of Shadow's vital signs. "Remember that night in Kandahar?" Marcus asked quietly during a brief lull, his eyes meeting James's across Shadow's prone form. "When we had to keep that wounded civilian stable until the medevac could reach us?" The parallel wasn't lost on anyone present. The same determination that had kept them going through long nights in combat now fueled their vigil over Shadow. As dawn began to paint the sky in pale pastels, Shadow's condition finally started to stabilize. The mare's breathing eased, and her temperature gradually returned to normal. The collective sigh of relief from the group was almost palpable. "She's fighting," Dr. Chen confirmed, reviewing the night's data. "But this episode confirms my concerns about the unusual nature of this pregnancy. The energy readings we're getting." She trailed off, shaking her head in bewilderment. "They're unlike anything I've ever encountered in veterinary medicine." James stood at the stall door, his shoulders tight with tension. The morning light streaming through the barn windows illuminated the grey in his hair, earned as much from nights like this as from his years in the Corps. Maya approached, holding out a cup of coffee and standing close enough that her presence offered silent support. "What if we're wrong, Dad?" she asked softly, voicing the fear that had been growing since the crisis began. "What if we're asking too much of her?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Before James could respond, Shadow struggled to her feet, her movements slow but determined. The mare turned to face them, and for a moment, James was struck by the intelligence and resolve in her dark eyes. It reminded him of the look he'd seen in his Marines' faces before difficult missions, a quiet, unwavering courage. "We're not wrong," he said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "Shadow's a fighter, just like every one of us in this barn. She's never given up on any of us, and we're not giving up on her." The statement was met with nods from the assembled veterans, each of them understanding the deep truth in his words. Dr. Chen began packing up her equipment, her movements measured and thoughtful. "I'll need to consult with some colleagues about these readings," she said. "In the meantime, we'll need to establish an even more rigorous monitoring schedule. Whatever's happening here goes beyond normal veterinary medicine." News of Shadow's crisis spread quickly through the tight-knit veteran community surrounding Hope's Haven. By afternoon, the barn had become a hub of focused activity as additional volunteers arrived, each bringing their own expertise and determination. To help, James watched as his small therapeutic riding center transformed into something resembling a military field hospital, complete with duty rosters and supply chains. "We've got veterans from 3 different counties volunteering for monitoring shifts," Maya reported, updating the massive scheduling board that now dominated one wall of the converted tack room. "Even got a former Navy corpsman driving up from Wyoming. Says he's got experience with exotic veterinary cases from his time working with marine mammals." Tom Sullivan, still running point on medical supplies, had transformed a corner of the barn into a makeshift command center. His laptop displayed spreadsheets tracking everything from Shadow's vital signs to the inventory of specialized equipment they'd managed to source. "Latest readings are holding steady," he announced, Echo maintaining his usual alert position nearby. "But these energy signatures Dr. Chen detected, they're something else entirely." James studied the complex graphs on Tom's screen, remembering similar briefings from his days leading Marine reconnaissance units. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Once again, he was facing an unknown situation with lives hanging in the balance. Only this time, it was Shadow's life, and possibly whatever extraordinary thing was growing inside her. "We've got company," Marcus called from his observation position near the barn entrance. A sleek government vehicle was pulling up the gravel driveway, its official plates catching the afternoon sun. James straightened instinctively, years of military service responding to the presence of authority. 2 figures emerged from the vehicle, a tall woman in a crisp suit and a younger man carrying sophisticated-looking equipment. They approached the barn with purpose, their government credentials clearly visible. "Mr. Mason," the woman called out. "I'm Dr. Catherine Wells from the Advanced Veterinary Research Division. We received Dr. Chen's data uploads about your unusual case." James exchanged quick glances with Maya and Marcus, an unspoken agreement passing between them. They'd known Shadow's condition would eventually attract outside attention, but the arrival of government scientists added a new layer of complexity to their situation. "Welcome to Hope's Haven," James replied diplomatically, his voice carrying the measured tone he'd used countless times during military briefings. "We appreciate your interest, but I should make it clear up front. Shadow's well-being comes first. Any research or observations will need to work around her needs and comfort." Dr. Wells nodded professionally, though her eyes kept darting to the sophisticated monitoring equipment surrounding Shadow's stall. "Of course. We're here to help, Mr. Mason. The readings Dr. Chen sent us, they're unprecedented. Whatever your mare is carrying, it could be of significant scientific importance." The barn fell silent as the implications of her words sank. Carol, who had been quietly grooming Shadow, straightened up protectively. "Scientific importance doesn't override ethical considerations," she stated firmly, her pilot's authority evident in her tone. "We've all seen what happens when science forgets about compassion." The government scientist's assistant had begun setting up his equipment, but James noticed Shadow's ears pinning back at the unfamiliar devices. The mare's discomfort was subtle, but to those who knew her well, it was obvious. "That's enough. And for now," James interrupted, his command voice brooking no argument. "Shadow's just recovered from a crisis. Any new procedures or equipment will need to be gradually introduced." Dr. Wells looked like she wanted to protest, but something in James's stance, the same bearing that had commanded respect in combat zones, made her reconsider. "We can start with reviewing the existing data," she conceded, gesturing to her assistant to stand down. "Perhaps Dr. Chen could walk us through her observations." Maya stepped forward, her protective instincts matching her father's. "I'll coordinate with Dr. Chen to schedule a proper briefing," she offered, already pulling out her tablet. "In the meantime, I can show you our monitoring protocols. We've developed some unique approaches by combining veteran medical experience with standard veterinary practice." As Maya led the scientists to the command center, James remained by Shadow's stall, his hand resting gently on the mare's neck. The warmth radiating from her body seemed different now, almost electric, and he could have sworn he felt something stirring beneath her skin that defied normal explanation. "They're going to want to take her to a facility," Marcus said quietly, wheeling closer. His years of military intelligence experience led to quick, accurate assessments. "Once they realize how unique this situation is, they'll try to move her to a controlled environment." James nodded grimly. "They can try," he responded, his voice low but determined. "But Shadow stays here, with her family. Whatever's coming, we face it together." The other veterans in the barn moved closer, their presence a silent affirmation of support. They'd all fought different battles, but this one united them with a common purpose. Carol approached, whiskey padding softly beside her. "Maybe it's time to activate our contingency plan," she suggested, referring to the backup procedures they'd developed after Shadow's crisis. "Just in case we need to protect her interests against outside intervention." The gravity of the situation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They'd all served their country faithfully, respected authority, and followed orders. But they also knew there were times when protecting what mattered most required standing your ground, even against formidable odds. The next morning brought a tense atmosphere to Hope's Haven as government vehicles continued to arrive, transforming the peaceful therapeutic riding center into something resembling a classified research site. Dr. Wells had established a temporary office in the old feed room, her team's sophisticated equipment humming day and night as they monitored Shadow's increasingly unusual readings. "These energy signatures are off the charts," James overheard one of the scientists saying as he passed by their makeshift command center. "The cellular activity we're detecting, it's like nothing we've ever seen in any known species." The excitement in their voices made his jaw clench. Shadow wasn't just some laboratory specimen, she was family. Maya found him later in Shadow's stall, where he'd taken to spending most of his time. The mare stood quietly, her enlarged belly now emitting a faint, almost imperceptible glow in the dim light. "Dad," Maya whispered, checking to ensure no government personnel were within earshot. Tom's picked up some concerning chatter. They're preparing transport protocols. Large-scale containment equipment arrived at the county airfield this morning. James's military instincts kicked into high gear. He'd suspected this might happen, but the reality still hit him like a punch to the gut. "Activate Protocol Echo," he said quietly, using their predetermined code. "Get Marcus to initiate our backup communications network and make sure Carol's ready with the diversionary plan." The veterans of Hope's Haven had spent years helping each other heal from the wounds of war, both visible and invisible. Now, those same bonds of trust and loyalty were being called upon for a different kind of mission. Throughout the day, they moved with practiced precision, their actions appearing routine to the watchful eyes of Dr. Wells's team. Tom Sullivan's service dog, Echo, became their early warning system, his subtle signals alerting them to approaching government personnel. The former combat medic had trained him well, and the German Shepherd's behavior appeared natural to anyone who didn't know better. Dr. Wells is requesting another round of tests, Carol reported during their evening briefing, held under the guise of a routine therapy session planning meeting. They're bringing in more specialized equipment tomorrow, something about measuring quantum anomalies. She paused, her pilot's training evident in her precise delivery of intelligence. They're also increasing security. I counted 3 unmarked vehicles doing perimeter sweeps. Marcus wheeled himself closer to the group, his laptop displaying a complex network of surveillance feeds he'd established around the property. They're setting up containment protocols, he confirmed grimly. Classic military-style quarantine. Preparation. I've seen it before during my ranger days. Shadow nickered softly from her stall, drawing their attention. The mare's intelligent eyes seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The strange warmth emanating from her body had intensified, and occasionally the air around her appeared to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Whatever's happening here goes beyond normal science, Dr. Chen admitted, having arrived for her evening checkup. She'd been caught between her professional fascination with Shadow's condition and her loyalty to Hope's Haven, the government team's latest theories. They're talking about possibilities that sound more like science fiction than veterinary medicine. James watched as Shadow gently nuzzled Maya's shoulder, the same way she'd done countless times during therapy sessions with troubled veterans. The mare's unwavering calm had helped so many find their way back from the brink of despair. He wouldn't let her be treated like some laboratory experiment. "We've got movement," Marcus suddenly announced, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. 3 more vehicles just turned onto the access road. Heavy transport capability. Military. Grade. They're not waiting for tomorrow. The veterans exchanged glances, years of combat experience allowing them to communicate volumes without words. They had prepared for this possibility, but the reality of potentially standing against their own government weighed heavily on each of them. "Remember Fallujah?" Tom asked quietly, directing the question to James. "When we were cut off from our unit, but we still had to protect that civilian hospital." The parallel was clear. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing your ground, even against overwhelming odds. Carol's hand rested on Whiskey's head, her service dog sensing her tension. "I've got the diversionary routes mapped out," she reported. 3 alternate paths to the safe location, all of them looking like normal therapy riding trails to anyone watching the satellite feeds. James straightened, feeling the familiar weight of command settling onto his shoulders. Years ago, he'd led Marines into combat, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Now, he was preparing to protect one of their own from a different kind of threat. "Shadow stays with us," he declared, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once guided troops through the worst of circumstances. "Whatever she's carrying, whatever's happening here, it's not for them to control or exploit. We've all seen what happens when power and scientific curiosity override compassion." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, their headlights sweeping across the barn's weathered walls like searchlights. Time was running out, and decisions made in the next few minutes would change everything. James looked at the assembled veterans, reading the unwavering resolve in their eyes. They had all sworn oaths to protect, and some oaths went deeper than any government authority. The next 15 minutes at Hope's Haven unfolded with the precision of a military operation. As government vehicles approached the property, the veterans executed their carefully planned defensive strategy. Marcus's surveillance system had given them the precious minutes they needed to initiate Protocol Echo, their emergency evacuation plan. Alpha Team, commence distraction protocol, James commanded through their secure radio channel. Carol and 3 other veterans immediately deployed, their service dogs creating a convincing scene of a late-night therapy session gone awry. The sounds of barking and shouted commands filled the air, drawing attention to the main arena. Meanwhile, Tom Sullivan worked with practiced efficiency in Shadow's stall, his combat medic experience evident in every movement. "Mobile monitoring equipment is secure," he reported, carefully attaching portable versions of the vital sign sensors to Shadow's specially designed halter. "Battery backup is green, and we've got 12 hours of continuous recording capability." Maya appeared with Shadow's specialized transport gear, her movements quick but gentle. "Easy, girl," she whispered as she worked, the mare staying remarkably calm despite the tension in the air, just like we practiced. They had spent weeks secretly preparing Shadow for this possibility, conducting nighttime drills under the guise of therapeutic exercises. Through the barn's back window, James could see Dr. Wells emerging from one of the government vehicles, her face illuminated by harsh floodlights as more unmarked cars pulled into the property. The scientist was speaking urgently into a phone, gesturing toward the barn with increasing agitation. "Hostile forces approaching from the north and east," Marcus reported from his surveillance station, his voice carrying the same steady tone he'd used during countless ranger operations. "2 teams, tactical formation. They're trying to be subtle, but these guys are definitely military, probably Black Ops or some specialized containment unit." James felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same focused clarity that had served him well in combat situations. "Initiate Phase 2, he ordered, triggering a series of predetermined responses from his team. Years of military training had taught them all the value of preparation and coordination. In the arena, Carol's distraction reached its crescendo. Whiskey and the other service dogs performed their roles perfectly, creating a convincing scenario of an emergency response to a veteran's trauma episode. The commotion drew several government agents away from the barn, their attention divided. "South route is clear," Marcus confirmed, his eyes scanning multiple camera feeds. "Window is open for the next 4 minutes. Service road cameras are looped, showing normal nighttime activity from 3 hours ago." James moved to Shadow's stall, where the mare stood ready, equipped with their specially modified gear. The strange glow emanating from her body seemed more pronounced now, creating an almost ethereal effect in the dim light. He placed a hand on her neck, feeling the unusual warmth and what seemed like pulses of energy beneath her skin. "You trust us, don't you, girl?" he murmured, receiving a gentle nicker in response. Shadow's eyes, intelligent and calm, met his with the same understanding that had helped him through countless nights of PTSD-induced anxiety. She seemed to comprehend the gravity of the situation. "Dad," Maya called softly from the barn's concealed back entrance. "Transport is in position. Tom's got the medical backup ready, and the safe house is prepped." She paused, checking her tactical watch. "We've got 3 minutes before their perimeter is fully established." The sound of boots on gravel grew closer as government agents approached the barn's main entrance. James could hear Dr. Wells's voice, attempting to sound authoritative. "Mr. Mason, we need to discuss Shadow's immediate transfer to a secure facility. These energy readings are becoming critically unstable." "Now!" James commanded into his radio, triggering the final phase of their plan. Simultaneously, the power across the entire property flickered and died, plunging everything into darkness. The government team's shouts of confusion were quickly drowned out by the sound of multiple small explosions, harmless but disorienting flashbangs, strategically placed by Marcus earlier that day. In the calculated chaos that followed, Shadow was led silently through the barn's concealed exit. The mare moved with surprising grace despite her condition, following James and Maya's guidance without hesitation. Years of trust-building in their therapy program had created a bond that went beyond normal human-animal relationships. Tom and Marcus coordinated their movements from different positions, ensuring their retreat remained undetected. Carol's team maintained their distraction in the arena, the genuine concern in their voices adding authenticity to the scene as they appeared to deal with multiple triggered veterans and agitated service dogs. "Target is secure," Maya whispered into her radio once Shadow was safely loaded into their specially prepared transport vehicle. The horse trailer had been modified with advanced suspension and monitoring equipment, ensuring the mare's comfort and safety during transport. James took one final look at Hope's Haven as they prepared to depart. The therapeutic riding center had been more than just a retirement project. It had been a place of healing for countless veterans. Now, it was becoming the site of their most important mission since leaving active duty. "Remember," he transmitted to his team, "maintain normal patterns for the next 48 hours. Anyone questioned sticks to the story. Veteran crisis. Response, nothing more. Rendezvous at Rally Point Charlie, according to schedule." He paused, watching the government team still searching the main buildings. "And thank you, all of you. Shadow's given us back our lives in different ways. Now it's our turn to protect hers." The mountain safe house was exactly as James remembered it from their advanced preparations. A remote ranch property nestled high in the Montana wilderness, far from prying eyes and sophisticated monitoring equipment. As their convoy arrived under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, Shadow's trailer carefully navigating the winding access road, he couldn't help but recall similar covert operations from his Marine Corps days. "Perimeter sensors are active," Marcus reported from the command center they'd established in the ranch house's converted basement. His wheelchair moved smoothly across the reinforced flooring as he checked multiple surveillance feeds. "No signs of pursuit or aerial reconnaissance. Looks like our countermeasures worked." The property had been carefully chosen and prepared over the past months, ever since they'd first detected Shadow's unusual readings. What looked like a standard horse barn to any satellite surveillance was, in fact, a sophisticated medical facility, equipped with everything Dr. Chen had deemed necessary for Shadow's care. "She's settling in well," Maya reported, emerging from the barn where they'd just finished transferring Shadow to her new stall. "The energy readings are actually more stable here. Maybe it's the elevation or the distance from all that government equipment." She handed her father a tablet displaying Shadow's latest vital signs. "Tom's setting up the portable imaging unit now." James studied the readings, noting how the strange energy signatures seemed to pulse in regular patterns now. The mare's skin still emanated that unusual warmth, and in the darkness of the barn, the faint glow around her belly was more noticeable than ever. "We've got incoming transmission from Carol," Marcus called out, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Operation Smokescreen is proceeding as planned. Government teams are following the false trail toward Wyoming. Dr. Wells is apparently quite convinced that's where we've gone." The deception had been carefully crafted, using Carol's extensive knowledge of aerial operations to create a convincing trail of sightings and electronic signatures. Her team was currently staging a series of diversions across 3 states, keeping the authorities occupied while Shadow's true location remained secure. Tom Sullivan emerged from the barn, his medical kit in hand, and Echo trotting faithfully beside him. "You need to see this," he said, his voice carrying an unusual edge of excitement. "The new imaging equipment is showing something extraordinary." The group gathered in the barn's medical bay, where Tom had set up a high-resolution display screen. The images it showed, made even Marcus whistle in astonishment. Inside Shadow's womb, clearly visible through the advanced imaging technology, was something that defied explanation. "That's impossible," Maya breathed, leaning closer to the screen. The fetal form they could see was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Its structure seemed to shift and change as they watched, emitting pulses of energy that their equipment could barely measure. "Not impossible," came a familiar voice. From the barn entrance, they turned to see Dr. Chen standing there, her medical bag in hand, just unprecedented. She'd arrived via a separate route, her involvement in their escape plan known only to James and Maya. The veterinarian moved to the monitoring equipment, her experienced eyes studying the readings. "The cellular structure we're seeing? It's like nothing in any known species." Years of trust building in their therapy program had created a bond that went beyond normal human-animal relationships. Tom and Marcus coordinated their movements from different positions, ensuring their retreat remained undetected. Carol's team maintained their distraction in the arena, the genuine concern in their voices adding authenticity to the scene as they appeared to deal with multiple triggered veterans and agitated service dogs. "Target is secure," Maya whispered into her radio once Shadow was safely loaded into their specially prepared transport vehicle. The horse trailer had been modified with advanced suspension and monitoring equipment, ensuring the mare's comfort and safety during transport. James took one final look at Hope's Haven as they prepared to depart. The therapeutic riding center had been more than just a retirement project. It had been a place of healing for countless veterans. Now, it was becoming the site of their most important mission since leaving active duty. "Remember," he transmitted to his team, "maintain normal patterns for the next 48 hours. Anyone questioned sticks to the story. Veteran crisis. Response, nothing more. Rendezvous at Rally Point Charlie, according to schedule." He paused, watching the government team still searching the main buildings. "And thank you, all of you. Shadow's given us back our lives in different ways. Now it's our turn to protect hers." The mountain safe house was exactly as James remembered it from their advanced preparations. A remote ranch property nestled high in the Montana wilderness, far from prying eyes and sophisticated monitoring equipment. As their convoy arrived under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, Shadow's trailer carefully navigating the winding access road, he couldn't help but recall similar covert operations from his Marine Corps days. "Perimeter sensors are active," Marcus reported from the command center they'd established in the ranch house's converted basement. His wheelchair moved smoothly across the reinforced flooring as he checked multiple surveillance feeds. "No signs of pursuit or aerial reconnaissance. Looks like our countermeasures worked." The property had been carefully chosen and prepared over the past months, ever since they'd first detected Shadow's unusual readings. What looked like a standard horse barn to any satellite surveillance was, in fact, a sophisticated medical facility, equipped with everything Dr. Chen had deemed necessary for Shadow's care. "She's settling in well," Maya reported, emerging from the barn where they'd just finished transferring Shadow to her new stall. "The energy readings are actually more stable here. Maybe it's the elevation or the distance from all that government equipment." She handed her father a tablet displaying Shadow's latest vital signs. "Tom's setting up the portable imaging unit now." James studied the readings, noting how the strange energy signatures seemed to pulse in regular patterns now. The mare's skin still emanated that unusual warmth, and in the darkness of the barn, the faint glow around her belly was more noticeable than ever. "We've got incoming transmission from Carol," Marcus called out, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Operation Smokescreen is proceeding as planned. Government teams are following the false trail toward Wyoming. Dr. Wells is apparently quite convinced that's where we've gone." The deception had been carefully crafted, using Carol's extensive knowledge of aerial operations to create a convincing trail of sightings and electronic signatures. Her team was currently staging a series of diversions across 3 states, keeping the authorities occupied while Shadow's true location remained secure. Tom Sullivan emerged from the barn, his medical kit in hand, and Echo trotting faithfully beside him. "You need to see this," he said, his voice carrying an unusual edge of excitement. "The new imaging equipment is showing something extraordinary." The group gathered in the barn's medical bay, where Tom had set up a high-resolution display screen. The images it showed made even Marcus whistle in astonishment. Inside Shadow's womb, clearly visible through the advanced imaging technology, was something that defied explanation. "That's impossible," Maya breathed, leaning closer to the screen. The fetal form they could see was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Its structure seemed to shift and change as they watched, emitting pulses of energy that their equipment could barely measure. "Not impossible," came a familiar voice. From the barn entrance, they turned to see Dr. Chen standing there, her medical bag in hand, just unprecedented. She'd arrived via a separate route, her involvement in their escape plan known only to James and Maya. The veterinarian moved to the monitoring equipment, her experienced eyes studying the readings. "The cellular structure we're seeing? It's like nothing in any known species. The energy patterns suggest some kind of accelerated evolution, but at a scale that shouldn't be possible." Shadow nickered softly from her stall, drawing their attention. The mare seemed remarkably calm for an animal that was apparently carrying something that defied scientific explanation. Her intelligent eyes watched them with that same steady gaze that had helped so many veterans find their way back from the brink. "The government's interest makes more sense now," Marcus commented, wheeling closer to examine the readings. "This goes beyond veterinary science. They probably think it has military applications." His voice carried the weight of experience. He'd seen how technological breakthroughs could be weaponized. James moved to Shadow's stall, placing a gentle hand on her neck. The energy pulses seemed to respond to his touch, creating a tingling sensation that ran up his arm. "Whatever's happening here," he said firmly, "it's not for them to control. Shadow chose to trust us with this miracle, and we're going to protect that trust." The next few hours were spent establishing their routine at the safe house. Veterans from their trusted network arrived in small groups, each bringing necessary supplies or specialized skills. A former Navy SEAL set up additional security measures around the perimeter, while an Air Force para-rescue specialist helped Tom organize their medical supplies. Latest chatter suggests the government teams are expanding their search into Idaho, Carol reported, via secure video link, her face illuminated by computer screens. "We've got them chasing shadows across 3 national forests, but we should assume they'll figure it out eventually. They're not going to give up easily on something like this." James nodded grimly, remembering similar pursuits from his military days. "Then we'll have to be ready," he replied. "Whatever Shadow's carrying, whatever this miracle turns out to be, it needs to happen on nature's timeline, not theirs." As if in response to his words, Shadow shifted in her stall, the glow around her belly intensifying momentarily. The energy readings spiked on their monitoring equipment, causing Dr. Chen to lean forward in fascination. "These patterns," she murmured, "they're becoming more organized, more coherent, almost like—" She was interrupted by a sudden change in Shadow's behavior. The mare's ears pricked forward, and her body tensed in a way that every experienced horseperson present recognized. Maya was the first to say it out loud, her voice filled with equal parts excitement and apprehension. "Dad, I think it's starting." The safe-house barn erupted into controlled chaos as everyone snapped into their predetermined roles. Tom Sullivan immediately began prepping the medical area, his combat medic training evident in his efficient movements. "Maya, get the specialized monitoring equipment online," he directed while laying out sterile instruments. "Marcus, we need real-time data recording of every energy fluctuation." Dr. Chen moved with practiced precision, her hands steady as she examined Shadow. The mare's vital signs were displaying patterns that made the veterinarian's eyes widen. "These readings, they're exponentially higher than anything we've recorded before," she reported, adjusting her instruments. "The energy signature is becoming more concentrated." The air in the barn seemed to crackle with an invisible force. Shadow's skin was now emanating waves of warmth that could be felt from several feet away, and the glow around her belly had intensified to a soft, pulsing radiance that cast dancing shadows on the barn walls. The mare remained surprisingly calm, though her eyes showed an awareness that seemed almost supernatural. "Perimeter alert," Marcus called from his surveillance station, his voice tense. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road. They're trying to stay hidden, but my thermal imaging is picking them up." He wheeled closer to his array of monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They've found us faster than we anticipated." James felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the same feeling he'd known in combat when an operation suddenly went sideways. "Carol," he spoke into their secure radio, "what's your status?" 3 minutes out," came the reply, crackling through their encrypted channel. "Got my old chopper crew running interference with some creative flight patterns. Should buy you some time, but not much." The sound of vehicles growing closer spurred everyone into faster action. Maya worked quickly to secure the barn's reinforced doors, while Tom and Dr. Chen continued their preparations. Shadow nickered softly, drawing James's attention. The mare's eyes met his with an intelligence that seemed to transcend normal human-animal. "Communication. Multiple teams deploying," Marcus reported, his voice carrying the steady tone of a veteran intelligence officer. "They're setting up a containment perimeter. Different tactical approach this time. Looks like they learned from our last evasion." He paused, studying his screens. "Wait, that's not standard government protocol. Those movements—" "Private military contractors," James finished grimly, recognizing the pattern. "They're not just trying to contain now. They're here to take her by force." His mind raced through options, evaluating and discarding plans with the speed of experience. They had prepared for government interference, but mercenaries would play by different rules. A sudden spike in the monitoring equipment's readings drew everyone's attention. The energy emanating from Shadow had shifted, taking on a rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Dr. Chen's instruments were registering levels that pushed past their designed limits. "Something's changing," Dr. Chen announced, her professional composure cracking slightly. "The cellular activity we're seeing. It's like nothing in recorded medical history. The energy patterns are becoming more organized, more—" She trailed off, staring at her readings in disbelief. Outside, they could hear the sounds of vehicles taking position and men moving with military precision. Through their surveillance feeds, they watched as armed figures began establishing a perimeter around the property. The mercenaries moved with the coordinated efficiency that spoke of extensive special operations training. "Dad!" Maya called, urgently from Shadow's side. "Look at this." The glow around the mare's belly had begun to coalesce into distinct patterns, creating shapes that seemed to defy the normal laws of physics. The air shimmered with waves of energy that made their skin tingle and the electronic equipment fluctuate wildly. Tom's service dog, Echo, normally the most disciplined of animals, began whining softly, his ears pricked forward and his entire body focused on Shadow. The other service dogs present showed similar reactions, their trained composure giving way to an almost reverent attention. "Energy readings are off the charts," Marcus reported, his screens showing cascading data streams that barely made sense. "Whatever's happening in there, it's affecting our equipment at a quantum level. These patterns, they're not random, there's intelligence behind them." James moved to Shadow's side, placing a steadying hand on her neck. The mare leaned into his touch, and for a moment he felt something impossible, a sense of connection that went beyond physical contact, as if Shadow was trying to communicate something crucial. "They're moving into position for breach," Marcus warned, his voice tight. "Multiple teams, professional gear, they're not taking chances this time." Through the surveillance feeds, they could see the mercenary teams preparing for a coordinated assault on the barn. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the tension, filled with a mix of professional fascination and personal awe. "The embryonic structure. It's not just unusual anymore. What we're seeing here." She paused, double-checking her instruments as if unwilling to trust their readings. "It's reorganizing itself at a molecular level. The genetic patterns are shifting in real time." Shadow's breathing had become deeper, more purposeful. The mare's eyes, still remarkably calm, seemed to hold ancient wisdom as the energy around her continued to build. The air in the barn felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. "Whatever happens," James addressed his team, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once guided Marines through the worst of circumstances. "Shadow chose us to protect this miracle. We hold this ground, no matter what comes through." That door. A sudden, brilliant pulse of energy from Shadow made every piece of electronic equipment in the barn surge. In that moment of intense light, as the sounds of approaching forces grew closer, they all realized they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of reality forever. The first explosion rocked the barn's reinforced walls, just as Shadow's energy readings reached their peak. The mare's entire body was now emanating pulses of brilliant light that made it almost impossible to look at her directly. Dr. Chen's monitoring equipment was registering values that defied scientific explanation, while Marcus's surveillance systems were being affected by waves of electromagnetic interference. "Breach teams in position," Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. "They're using military-grade thermal imaging to track the energy. Signatures, 10 seconds to entry." Through the surveillance feeds that were still functioning, they could see the mercenary teams moving with practiced precision, their gear suggesting unlimited funding and advanced technology. "Stay with her," James ordered Maya and Dr. Chen, moving to support Tom as he finished barricading the secondary entrances. The former combat medic had rigged defensive measures that would slow down any forced entry, but against a well-equipped professional team, they knew it was only buying time. Shadow's nickering cut through the tension, a sound so calm and reassuring that it seemed completely at odds with the situation. The mare stood steady in her reinforced stall, her eyes showing no fear despite the increasing chaos around her. The light emanating from her body had taken on a rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate with something deep and primal in everyone present. "James," Dr. Chen called out, her voice filled with controlled urgency, "these readings suggest we're about to witness something unprecedented. The molecular structure we're seeing. It's reorganizing itself in ways that shouldn't be possible. The energy patterns are becoming more coherent, more—" She trailed off as new data flooded her screens. The second explosion hit just as Shadow's energy field expanded dramatically. The blast was met by a wave of force that seemed to emanate from the mare herself, creating a sphere of shimmering energy that enveloped her stall. The mercenary team breaching the eastern door suddenly found their equipment malfunctioning, their tactical gear responding to some unseen influence. "That's not possible," Marcus breathed, watching his senses try to make sense of what was happening. "The energy field. It's generating its own defensive barrier. like it's protecting itself. His military intelligence training had never prepared him for anything like this. Maya stood transfixed beside Shadow, her hand resting gently on the mare's neck. "Dad!" she called out, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel something. It's like she's trying to tell us something." The connection between human and horse that had been the foundation of their therapy program seemed to be evolving into something far more profound. Tom's service dog, Echo, along with the other therapy dogs present, had fallen into an unusual state of calm attention. Their trained alertness had given way to something that looked almost like reverence, their eyes fixed on Shadow as the energy around her continued to build. "Multiple breaches incoming!" Marcus warned as his sensors picked up movement from all sides. The mercenary teams had regrouped and were preparing for a coordinated assault. The sound of boots on gravel was accompanied by the distinct clicks of weapons being readied, but before anyone could react, Shadow's energy field pulsed one final time, and the air itself seemed to tear open around her. The light emanating from her body intensified to an almost unbearable degree, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When they could look again, what they saw defied all explanation. Floating in the air around Shadow, suspended in what appeared to be a field of pure energy, was a form that seemed to shift between states of matter. It was both solid and ethereal, corporeal and spiritual, its appearance changing moment by moment, like a living kaleidoscope of possibility. "Dear God," Dr. Chen whispered, her scientific detachment completely shattered. "It's not just a foal. It's something entirely new, a bridge between worlds." Her instruments were recording data that would revolutionize multiple fields of science, assuming anyone would believe their readings. The mercenary teams that had breached the barn's defenses stood frozen, their weapons lowered in shock. The sight before them transcended their mission parameters, their training offering no protocol for what they were witnessing. James moved to stand beside his daughter, watching as the energy form gradually began to coalesce into something more defined. Shadow remained perfectly calm, her eyes filled with an ancient wisdom as she watched her extraordinary offspring take shape. "It's beautiful," Maya breathed, tears streaming down her face. The form was becoming clearer now, taking on characteristics that seemed both equine and otherworldly. Its coat shimmered with colors that shouldn't exist in nature, while its movement, through the air, appeared to bend the very fabric of reality. Tom's medical monitors were recording physiological changes in everyone present, elevated brainwave patterns, increased neural activity, and other readings that suggested they were all being affected by what they were witnessing. "Whatever this is," he reported, his voice hushed, "it's changing us just by being here." The mercenary team's commander stepped forward, slowly lowering his tactical gear. "Stand down," he ordered his men, his voice carrying the weight of someone witnessing something that changed everything they thought they knew. Nobody touches this. Nobody interferes. Through it all, Shadow maintained that same calm presence that had helped so many veterans find their way back from the brink of despair. Now, as she watched her extraordinary offspring gradually descend to touch the ground for the first time, her eyes held the same gentle understanding that had made her such a powerful force for healing. Time seemed to stand still in the barn as the ethereal creature took its first steps on solid ground. Its hooves, if they could be called that, left subtle traces of light with each movement, like ripples in the fabric of reality. The being's coat shifted through colors that shouldn't exist in nature, while its form seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. "Preliminary readings suggest it's stable," Dr. Chen reported, her scientific training wrestling with the wonder before her. "The energy field has normalized, but—" She paused, checking her instruments again. "It's still generating quantum signatures unlike anything we've ever recorded. The implications for physics alone are revolutionary." The mercenary team's commander, who had introduced himself as Colonel Richards, stood in quiet conversation with James. The hardened veteran's face showed the same mix of awe and disbelief that everyone else was experiencing. "I've seen a lot in my years of service," he admitted, "but this changes everything we thought we knew." Shadow moved with tender care around her extraordinary offspring, her maternal instincts apparently transcending the barriers between ordinary reality and whatever realm her foal represented. The bond between them was visible in more than just behavior. Waves of energy passed between them in patterns that seemed to carry meaning beyond human understanding. "The neural readings are off the charts," Tom reported from his medical station, where Echo sat alertly by his side. "Everyone in proximity to the foal is showing increased brain activity, particularly in areas associated with emotional processing and higher consciousness. It's actively affecting our perception of reality." Maya hadn't moved from her position near Shadow's stall, her eyes fixed on the miraculous scene before her. "Dad," she called softly, "look at how it moves. It's like watching a dream take physical form." The foal's movements indeed had a fluid quality that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics, each step carrying it slightly above the ground, rather than on it. Marcus wheeled closer to his bank of monitors, his military intelligence training evident in his methodical documentation of events. "The energy signature is unique, but stable," he noted. "No signs of degradation or instability. Whatever this is, it's maintaining its form through some kind of self-sustaining quantum field." The other veterans present, including Carol, who had arrived shortly after the birth, stood in reverent silence. Many of them had experienced profound healing through their work with Shadow, but this went beyond therapeutic connection into something far more profound. "It's not just different." "Physically," Carol observed, her pilot's trained eye catching subtle details. "Watch how it interacts with the space around it. It's like it's aware of everything at once, operating on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously." Whiskey, her service dog, sat calmly at her feet, showing none of the anxiety that unusual situations typically prompted. Colonel Richards had ordered his team to maintain a respectful perimeter, their advanced equipment now focused on monitoring rather than containment. "I was sent here to secure a potential threat to national security," he said to James, shaking his head in wonder. "Instead, we're witnessing what might be the most significant event in human history." Dr. Chen's instruments continued to record data that defied conventional scientific understanding. "The cellular structure, if we can even call it that, appears to be in a constant state of quantum flux," she explained, trying to put the impossible into words. "It's simultaneously matter and energy, physical and ethereal. By all known laws of physics, this shouldn't be possible." Shadow nickered softly, drawing everyone's attention as her foal responded with a sound that seemed to resonate on multiple frequencies at once. The air shimmered with patterns of light that carried meaning beyond ordinary communication, creating ripples of understanding in the minds of all present. "It's not just a new form of life," Maya realized, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "It's a bridge between worlds, between different states of being. Shadow wasn't just carrying a foal, she was helping birth a new reality." The truth of her words was evident in the way the creature moved through space, each motion suggesting possibilities beyond normal physical limitations. Its presence seemed to expand the boundaries of what everyone thought possible, pushing against the edges of conventional understanding. James watched as the being that had emerged from Shadow continued to explore its surroundings, each movement revealing new aspects of its extraordinary nature. His years of military service had taught him to evaluate and adapt to unexpected situations, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. "The question now," Colonel Richards said quietly, "is what happens next." This isn't something that can be contained or controlled. It's beyond any human authority or jurisdiction. His words carried the weight of someone who understood the full implications of what they were witnessing. The foal turned its attention to the assembled humans, its gaze carrying an intelligence that seemed to look straight through to their souls. In its eyes, they could see reflections of possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of ordinary reality. Healing that went deeper than physical wounds, understanding that transcended normal consciousness, and connections that bridged the gaps between all forms of existence. The first effects of the ethereal foal's presence became apparent within hours of its birth. Tom Sullivan noticed it first through his medical monitoring equipment, subtle changes in the brainwave patterns of everyone in proximity to the creature. But it was Marcus who first experienced its extraordinary healing properties directly. "I can feel my legs," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The veteran ranger had been wheelchair-bound since an IED explosion in Afghanistan, but as the otherworldly foal approached him, sensations he hadn't experienced in years began to return. "It's like something's rewiring my neural pathways." Dr. Chen rushed to his side with her medical equipment, her scientific curiosity warring with her amazement. "The regeneration patterns are unprecedented," she reported, studying the readings. "Nerve tissue that was completely severed is somehow reconnecting, but through a process that defies our understanding of cellular biology." The ethereal creature moved with fluid grace toward Marcus, its form shifting between states of matter as it approached. Where it passed, the air seemed to ripple with possibilities, reality itself bending slightly to accommodate its presence. Shadow watched from her stall with calm understanding, as if she had known all along what her extraordinary offspring would bring into the world. "It's not just physical healing," Carol observed, her hand unconsciously moving to the scar tissue from her own combat injuries. "Something deeper is happening." The former pilot's eyes held a new clarity, the haunted look that had lingered since her helicopter crash notably absent. James could feel it too, a lifting of the heavy weight of PTSD that he'd carried since his last tour. The darkness that had clouded his mind for so long was being replaced by a sense of peace and understanding that went beyond normal therapeutic recovery. "It's like it's healing not just our bodies, but our souls," he said quietly. Maya watched in wonder as the foal moved among the veterans, its presence catalyzing transformations that seemed to transcend the boundaries between physical and spiritual healing. The service dogs, always sensitive to their handlers' conditions, showed visible reactions to the changes occurring in their partners, their alert, protective stances softening as they sensed the healing taking place. Colonel Richards and his team were not immune to the effects. The hardened mercenaries found themselves experiencing a profound shift in perspective, their military conditioning giving way to a deeper understanding of their place in the universe. "I've spent my career dealing with threats and containment," Richards admitted, "but this is something we need to protect and share." Tom's medical monitors continued to record the extraordinary changes taking place. "The healing effects appear to be adapting to each individual's needs," he reported, analyzing the data streams. "It's not just repairing damage, it's optimizing our entire physiological and neurological systems in ways we can barely comprehend." The foal's coat continued to shift through impossible colors as it moved, each hue seeming to carry different healing properties. When it approached Tom's station, Echo, who had been watching everything with unusual intensity, suddenly stood and walked toward it. The service dog's previous injury from his own military service, a slight limp that veterinarians had declared permanent, vanished as he moved through the creature's energy field. "The quantum field it's generating," Dr. Chen explained. her voice filled with academic excitement. "It seems to be creating a space where the normal rules of physics and biology don't apply. It's accessing possibilities that exist beyond our current understanding of reality." Shadow nickered softly, drawing the foal back to her side. The bond between them was visible in more than just behavior. Streams of energy passed between them in complex patterns, suggesting a form of communication that transcended normal understanding. The mare's own presence seemed enhanced by her offspring's existence, her therapeutic abilities amplified to new levels. "Look at this," Maya called out, pointing to the monitoring screens. The data showed expanding waves of energy radiating from the barn, affecting the surrounding environment in subtle but profound ways. Plants in the vicinity were showing accelerated growth and vitality, while small animals drawn to the area displayed unusual levels of calm and awareness. James moved closer to Shadow and her extraordinary foal, feeling waves of healing energy wash over him. The nightmares that had plagued him since combat, the hypervigilance that had never fully faded, the deep-seated trauma that therapy had only partially addressed. All of it was being transformed into something new, not erased, but integrated into a deeper understanding of existence itself. "It's not just healing our wounds," he realized, watching as other veterans experienced similar transformations. "It's showing us a new way of being, a different level of consciousness." The foal turned its impossible eyes toward him, and in that gaze, he saw reflections of realities beyond normal human perception, layers of existence where healing and wholeness were the natural state. News of the extraordinary events at the safe house spread through the veteran community with remarkable speed, despite efforts to maintain secrecy. Within days, vehicles began appearing on the remote mountain roads, not government agents or mercenaries this time, but veterans drawn by an inexplicable sense that something miraculous was happening. "They're coming from all over the country," Marcus reported from his monitoring station, now able to stand for short periods as his healing continued to progress. "Former combat medics, disabled vets, guys with severe PTSD, somehow they all know to come here." The surveillance feed showed a growing collection of vehicles making their way up the mountain, many bearing military service stickers and disabled veteran plates. Colonel Richards, who had shifted from potential adversary to ally, coordinated with his team to manage the influx of visitors. "Most of them are reporting the same thing," he told James, reviewing the interview transcripts. "Dreams of a glowing horse, visions of healing light, some kind of subconscious calling that they can't explain." The ethereal foal, which Maya had begun calling Aurora for its ever-shifting colors, seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Its form still flickered between states of matter, but there was a purposefulness to its movements now, as if it understood its role in what was unfolding. Shadow remained close by, her own presence amplified by her offspring's energy field. "The healing effects are evolving," Dr. Chen announced, studying her latest data. "The quantum field is becoming more focused, more efficient in how it interfaces with human physiology. It's like it's learning, adapting to better serve those who come seeking help." Her instruments showed increasingly complex patterns of energy that defied conventional scientific understanding. Tom Sullivan had set up a makeshift medical screening area, working with other combat medics to document the transformations taking place. "It's not just physical injuries being healed," he reported, Echo still faithfully by his side. "We're seeing profound psychological changes, PTSD symptoms disappearing, decades-old trauma being resolved in moments of contact with Aurora." The safe house barn had become a sanctuary of healing, its space filled with an atmosphere of profound peace that affected everyone who entered. Veterans who arrived angry or haunted by their experiences found themselves experiencing a deep sense of tranquility and understanding that went beyond normal therapeutic intervention. "Watch this," Maya called out, pointing to one of the monitoring screens. A former Marine who had lost both legs to an IED was experiencing his first encounter with Aurora. The ethereal foal approached him with that fluid grace that seemed to deny physical laws, its energy field enveloping him in swirling patterns of light. Before their eyes, his prosthetic legs began to integrate with his nervous system in ways that advanced medical technology had never achieved. "It's not just regenerating tissue," Dr. Chen explained, her voice filled with wonder as she studied the readings. "It's creating new neural pathways, optimizing the connection between mind and body in ways we've never seen before. Even his prosthetics are being transformed at a molecular level." Carol, who had been coordinating aerial surveillance to ensure their security, landed her helicopter with news from the outside world. "The energy field is affecting a wider area than we thought," she reported. "Local wildlife is showing unprecedented behavior patterns, increased intelligence, enhanced healing abilities. Even the plant life is evolving in ways botanists can't explain." James watched as more veterans arrived, each one drawn by that inexplicable calling. Among them were former adversaries, men who had once fought on opposite sides of various conflicts, now finding themselves brought together by this phenomenon that transcended human divisions. "The quantum field seems to carry information as well as healing energy," Dr. Chen noted, reviewing her latest findings. "Veterans are reporting shared visions, enhanced empathy, a deeper understanding of their connections to each other and the world around them. It's as if Aurora is acting as a conduit for a higher level of consciousness." Shadow moved among the gathered veterans with careful attention, her own therapeutic abilities enhanced by her offspring's presence. The mare's intuitive understanding of human trauma, which had made her such an effective therapy animal, now seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. "Look at their brainwave patterns," Tom called out, pointing to his medical displays. The veterans who had experienced Aurora's healing showed synchronized neural activity, suggesting a level of connection that went beyond normal human interaction. "It's like they're being tuned to the same frequency, finding harmony at a quantum level." Colonel Richards, who had been maintaining contact with his superiors, approached James with a thoughtful expression. "Word is spreading through official channels," he reported, "but something interesting is happening. Everyone who learns about this, who truly understands what we're witnessing, is having the same reaction. They're choosing to protect it rather than control it." As the second week of Aurora's existence began, the phenomenon at the safe house had grown beyond anything they could have anticipated. The ethereal foal's influence had begun to manifest in ways that challenged the very foundations of human understanding, while Shadow continued to serve as a steady anchor for the extraordinary events unfolding around them. "The neural network is expanding," Marcus reported, his restored legs allowing him to pace between monitoring stations. "We're picking up synchronized brainwave patterns from people who haven't even visited the sanctuary yet. It's like Aurora's creating some kind of quantum consciousness web." The screens showed patterns of energy spreading outward in ever-widening circles, connecting people across vast distances. Dr. Chen had been working around the clock, collaborating with scientists who had been carefully vetted and brought to the site. "The implications are staggering," she explained, reviewing the latest data. "We're seeing evidence of non-local quantum entanglement between individuals who've experienced Aurora's healing. They're maintaining therapeutic connections across any distance, sharing insights and accelerating each other's recovery." The safe house grounds had transformed into something resembling a peaceful pilgrimage site. Veterans continued to arrive, drawn by that inexplicable calling, But now they were joined by others, families affected by trauma, healthcare workers seeking understanding, and even traditional healers from various cultures who sensed the profound significance of what was occurring. The indigenous healers who visited yesterday said something interesting, Maya told her father as they watched Aurora move among the gathered crowd. They said Aurora isn't just a new form of life, she's a manifestation of healing potential that has always existed in the universe, just beyond our normal perception. Tom's medical documentation had grown into an extensive database of miraculous recoveries. It's not just the immediate healing effects anymore, he reported, coordinating with other medical professionals who had joined their effort. People who've been here, who've experienced Aurora's presence, are developing enhanced healing abilities of their own. It's like she's awakening something dormant in human consciousness. Shadow had become revered in her own right, recognized as the one who had made this miracle possible. The mare moved through the crowds with serene confidence, her own healing presence amplified by her extraordinary offspring. Veterans who had worked with her in therapy before now reported even deeper levels of connection and understanding. The quantum field is affecting temporal perception, Dr. Chen announced, studying new readings with growing excitement. People in Aurora's presence are experiencing time differently. Past trauma becoming more accessible and manageable, future potential more clearly visible. It's like she's helping people step outside the normal flow of time to facilitate deeper healing. Colonel Richards, who had maintained his protective role while experiencing his own profound transformation, approached James with new intelligence. The word is spreading through military channels worldwide, he reported. But here's the extraordinary thing. Every high-ranking officer who learns about this is experiencing the same dreams, the same calling. They're all choosing to protect rather than exploit. The effects weren't limited to humans. The surrounding wilderness had begun to show remarkable changes. The entire ecosystem is being elevated, Carol observed during one of her aerial surveys. We're seeing accelerated forest recovery, increased biodiversity, even evidence of enhanced communication between different species. It's like Aurora's presence is reminding nature of its own healing potential. James watched as a group of veterans who had once been trapped in the darkest depths of PTSD now sat together in peaceful communion, their faces reflecting a profound inner transformation. It's not just healing in the conventional sense, he realized. Aurora's showing us what we're capable of becoming. The ethereal foal moved with increasing purpose now, its form shifting between states of matter as it worked with each person, who came seeking help. But unlike conventional healing, which focused solely on removing illness or injury, Aurora's influence seemed to elevate people beyond their original state, awakening dormant potential and expanding consciousness. The energy patterns suggest we're witnessing the emergence of a new paradigm, Dr. Chen explained to a group of visiting researchers. Aurora isn't just healing individuals, she's showing us a new way of being, a higher level of existence that we've always been capable of achieving but never knew how to access. Maya had noticed another fascinating pattern. Watch how people change after they leave here, she told her father. They're not just healed, they're becoming healers themselves. It's like Aurora's awakening something that spreads naturally, from person to person, growing stronger with each connection. Through it all, Shadow maintained her calm presence, seemingly understanding the profound role she had played in bringing this new form of consciousness into the world. The mare's gentle eyes held the same wisdom that had helped countless veterans find their way back from trauma, now elevated to a universal scale. We're seeing the emergence of what some are calling quantum empathy, Tom reported, reviewing the latest psychological data. People who've experienced Aurora's healing are developing the ability to sense and support others' healing processes instinctively. The boundaries between self and other are becoming more fluid, more interconnected. 1 month after Aurora's birth, the transformation had spread far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. What had begun as a miraculous healing among veterans had evolved into a phenomenon that was quietly reshaping human consciousness on a global scale. James stood at his familiar spot near Shadow's stall, watching as his simple therapeutic riding center continued its evolution into something that defied description. The network is now self-sustaining, Marcus reported during their morning briefing, his restored legs carrying him smoothly across the command center they'd established. Every person who experiences Aurora's healing becomes a node in the quantum consciousness web, amplifying and spreading the effect. We're seeing spontaneous healing communities forming on every continent. Dr. Chen, who had hardly left the sanctuary since Aurora's birth, looked up from her complex array of monitoring equipment. The most fascinating aspect is how the effect adapts to different cultures and belief systems, she explained. It's not imposing a single way of healing, it's awakening each community's inherent healing wisdom, enhanced by this new quantum understanding. Maya had been coordinating with a growing network of therapeutic centers worldwide, each one spontaneously forming around individuals who had experienced Aurora's presence. It's like ripples in a pond, she observed, showing her father the latest data. Every person who leaves here becomes a catalyst for transformation in their own community. The healing is evolving uniquely in each location while maintaining its fundamental connection to the whole. Shadow and Aurora had developed an extraordinary working relationship, their combined presence creating healing effects that continued to surpass all expectations. The ethereal Foal's form had stabilized somewhat, though it still shifted between states of matter when working with particularly challenging cases. Shadow's steady, grounding presence seemed to help people integrate the profound transformations they were experiencing. The military applications we initially feared have transformed into something entirely different, Colonel Richards reported, having just returned from a high-level briefing at the Pentagon. Instead of weapons development, we're seeing a fundamental shift in how military organizations worldwide view their purpose. Former enemies are reaching out to each other, finding common ground in this new understanding. Tom Sullivan, who had been documenting the medical implications, shared his latest findings. The healing isn't limited to recent injuries or trauma, he explained, Echo still faithfully by his side. We're seeing genetic conditions being corrected, generational trauma being resolved, even aging processes being optimized. It's like the presence of Aurora and Shadow is reminding our bodies and minds of their original blueprint for wholeness. Carol's aerial surveys had revealed another extraordinary development. The environmental impact is spreading exponentially, she reported, showing footage from her latest flight. Damaged ecosystems are regenerating at unprecedented rates. It's like the Earth itself is responding to this new frequency of healing. The sanctuary had become a place of profound peace, where former enemies found themselves naturally moving toward reconciliation. Veterans who had once fought against each other now sat together in deep conversation, their previous conflicts transformed into shared understanding through Aurora's influence. The quantum field is showing signs of permanent, positive alteration in human consciousness, Dr. Chen announced, studying her latest readings. People who experience the healing aren't just recovering from trauma. They're accessing higher states of awareness that seem to be natural to human potential, but were previously locked away by our limited understanding. James watched as a group of newly arrived veterans experienced their first encounter with Aurora. The ethereal foal moved among them with that impossible grace, its form shifting through colors that spoke directly to each person's needs. Shadow followed close behind, her steady presence helping to ground the profound transformations taking place. "It's changing how we understand reality itself," Maya observed, standing beside her father. "Aurora isn't just healing individuals. She's showing us what's possible when we transcend our limited perception of what we are." The young woman had grown into her role as a facilitator of this new paradigm, her natural empathy enhanced by the quantum consciousness they were all experiencing. The safe house had evolved into what some were calling a nexus of consciousness, transformation. People arrived seeking physical or emotional healing, but left with something far more profound, a fundamental shift in how they perceived themselves and their connection to all life. The most remarkable aspect, Tom noted, reviewing his extensive documentation, is how the healing effects continue to evolve and deepen over time. People who were healed in those first days report ongoing transformation, as if Aurora activated a process of continuous positive evolution in human consciousness. Intelligence reports from around the world painted a picture of spontaneous peace initiatives breaking out in long-standing conflict zones. "It's like the quantum consciousness web is dissolving the illusions that kept us separated," Colonel Richards explained. "When you can literally feel another person's experience at a quantum level, it becomes impossible to maintain the barriers that lead to conflict." Shadow nickered softly, drawing their attention. The mare's eyes held that same deep wisdom that had first drawn James to her after his return from combat, now amplified by her role in bringing this new consciousness into the world. Aurora stood beside her, their combined presence creating waves of healing energy that continued to transform everyone they encountered. "We're witnessing the beginning of something," James said quietly, watching as more people arrived at the sanctuary, drawn by that inexplicable calling. Not just healing in the traditional sense, but an awakening to what humanity is truly capable of becoming. 6 months after Aurora's extraordinary birth, James stood at the crest of the hill overlooking what had once been a simple therapeutic riding center. The sanctuary had grown into something that defied conventional description, a nexus of healing and transformation that continued to reshape the world in subtle but profound ways. "The latest data confirms it," Marcus reported, standing strongly on his fully healed legs beside his old friend. "The quantum consciousness network has achieved complete global coverage. There isn't a place on Earth that hasn't been touched by what started here." His monitoring stations, now part of a worldwide network, showed patterns of healing and transformation continuing to spread and evolve. Dr. Chen, who had recently returned from presenting their findings to an international scientific conference, joined them at the Overlook. "The academic world is still struggling to create new frameworks to understand what we're witnessing," she explained. "We're having to develop entirely new branches of science just to begin describing the effects Aurora and Shadow have catalyzed." The sanctuary below hummed with peaceful activity. Veterans who had first come seeking healing now returned as teachers and facilitators, helping others integrate the profound transformations they were experiencing. The once simple barn had evolved into a complex of healing spaces, each designed to support different aspects of the consciousness evolution taking place. "Watch this," Maya called out, directing their attention to where Aurora was working with a newly arrived group. The ethereal foal, now fully grown but still shifting between states of matter, moved among them with purposeful grace. As they watched, the quantum field around Aurora synchronized with each person's energy, creating visible waves of transformation that rippled outward to touch everyone in the vicinity. Shadow, her coat now shimmering with hints of the same otherworldly energy that characterized her offspring, maintained her role as a grounding presence. The mare's therapeutic wisdom had deepened beyond anything they could have imagined, her ability to connect with troubled souls, now operating on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. The military applications we once feared have transformed into something beautiful, Colonel Richards reflected, joining them at their observation point. Every major armed force in the world is now primarily focused on healing and peacekeeping. The very concept of warfare is becoming obsolete as this new consciousness continues to spread. Tom Sullivan, who had been coordinating with medical facilities worldwide, shared the latest statistics. "The effects are becoming generational," he reported, Echo still faithfully by his side. "Children born to parents who've experienced Aurora's healing are showing advanced capabilities for empathy and understanding. It's like we've activated a new stage in human evolution." Carol landed her helicopter nearby, returning from another survey mission. "The environmental regeneration is accelerating," she announced, joining the group. "Dead zones in the oceans are coming back to life, forests are regenerating, and species we thought were lost are reappearing. The Earth itself seems to be responding to this new frequency of consciousness." James watched as another group of veterans arrived at the sanctuary, their faces showing that mixture of hope and disbelief he had come to recognize. Despite all the scientific attention and worldwide recognition, they had maintained the sanctuary's primary mission, helping those who had been wounded in body and soul find their way back to wholeness. "The quantum field has achieved a self-sustaining momentum," Dr. Chen noted, reviewing her latest readings. "Even if Aurora and Shadow were to leave now, the transformation they've initiated would continue. Humanity has remembered something it had forgotten about its own potential." Maya, who had grown into a leading facilitator of this new paradigm, smiled as she watched Aurora work. It was never just about healing injuries or trauma, she realized. They've shown us what we're capable of becoming when we transcend our limited understanding of reality. The sanctuary had become a living symbol of possibility, proof that the deepest wounds, whether in individuals, societies, or the earth itself, could be healed through this new understanding of consciousness and connection. Veterans who had once been trapped in the darkness of PTSD now moved through the world as beacons of transformation, their hard-won wisdom helping others navigate their own journeys of healing. "Look at that," Tom called out softly, pointing to where Aurora and Shadow stood together near the old barn. The ethereal light that surrounded them seemed to pulse in harmony with the heartbeat of the earth itself, creating waves of healing, energy that rippled outward to touch everything in their path. "Who would have thought," James mused, his voice filled with quiet wonder, "that my decision to trust Shadow's unusual pregnancy would lead to all of this? The simple act of choosing hope over fear, of standing by a beloved companion through an impossible situation, had opened a door to transformation that continued to reshape their world." As the sun set behind the Montana mountains, casting the sanctuary in golden light, James reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a crisis, a veteran trying to protect his therapeutic mare through an unprecedented pregnancy, had evolved into a catalyst for global transformation. Shadow and Aurora had shown them that the greatest miracles often came from choosing to trust in possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. The story of the veteran and his extraordinary mare had become legend, a testament to the power of love, trust, and the unlimited potential for healing that existed within all living things. As darkness fell and the ethereal light from Aurora illuminated the sanctuary, James knew that this was not an ending, but rather the beginning of humanity's next great adventure in consciousness and connection. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.